Hi Louise, a question on education in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
I think $84 million over the next 4 years is a considerable investment, and I think it's a good step in regards to recognising the importance of international students in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
There have been issues in the past of exactly how your agencies work with institutions. So how will Education New Zealand work with institutions, for example universities, to attract and retain international students?
I can't answer the detail of that because it's not a field I'm familiar with, but I'm happy to get your details and get some more information to you. What I do want to say is a comment that's come out on a number of occasions is that perhaps our tertiary institutions aren't doing enough in terms of actually wanting to have more international students in their environments. And if I think back again to the times that I was studying, I think it's really important, and part of your own learning experience is so much richer if you've got others with different experiences and that have come from other countries, and you can learn so much more from being in a classroom environment with them. The thing, if I look at other parts of the tertiary system where international education is being delivered, their biggest frustration was what they saw was a significant waste of money, because there were these 3 different organisations and they were sort of in some areas falling over each other and duplicating what they were doing, and in other areas nothing or not enough was being done. So that's really where the significant focus is. I'm happy to get your details afterwards and talk specifically, find out specific information about how they will work with tertiary institutions.
I think the reason why I asked the question was because in some institutions, a contributing factor to why tuition fees for domestic students increase is because of lack of numbers of international students. They may not say it up front, I'm going to be honest with it, but it certainly is a contributing factor to why we pay more every year.
And is that a common view on domestic fees?
Certainly from my institution.
Okay. Cool.
This is kind of a connected question in terms of attracting international students. In real terms, investment in university institutions has gone down over the last few years, and that's having an effect on QS rankings and such. Do you see that as a problem for the long-term future of New Zealand education?
So why do you say that the funding's gone down?
So in real terms, funding to institutions has gone down.
Okay, so I would dispute that, but that's okay. In terms of one of the things that we've got to do across the board is get higher levels of performance of all of our tertiary providers, and I think universities in particular. What's really important and will continue to be important in terms of students' employability, whether it's in New Zealand or whether it's overseas, is the reputation from the universities that they attend. Are universities any different than any other part of the public sector in terms of there being pressure on their budgets? Absolutely not. So is there an expectation that they'll be able to do more with what they have? They're exactly the same as everywhere else in the public sector. But that's not at a sacrifice of quality, and that's why we've put those performance indicators in place. Admittedly, only 5% of their funding is that performance tagged, but that will send a very clear message around better outcomes. So rather than just more money in and nothing out the bottom, it's about better quality as a result of the funding that's in the tertiary system.
Hi Louise, I'm from the World Institute of Technology, and you've talked a lot this morning about universities, and I was just wondering, what are your guys' plans for polytechs as well? Because you've talked a lot about funding universities, but not polytechs.
Great.
What are you doing in terms of funding for polytechs?
So I think it's important just to take a step back and look at one of the significant things that we have done for the polytechnics in this term of office. And that was the governance changes. So we've had a situation where some of the polytechs haven't been particularly performing very well, and that was identified as a challenge or a problem, if you like, with the governance of the polytechs. And so that was an early piece of legislation that we passed that has been implemented to change the governance of polytechs so that the money that goes into the polytechs is used better. I don't have any details on the difference in terms of what polytech funding is being spent as opposed to universities, and I apologise if too much of the focus of today had been universities. That was perhaps a mismatch of my expectation.
So you do, there is a difference in funding, so are we like less undervalued, or what's the story with that?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. In terms of our tertiary education system, we've got a range of different pathways, whether it's your ITOs, whether it's your polytechs, universities, PTEs, they are all important. And I guess it's fair to say, having been in some audiences, PTEs included, there's often some grumbles that they think that universities get too much attention. I don't think that's the truth. I think it's important that we have a balanced system that works well and provides as many choices for high quality tertiary education in whichever part of the components you're in. But what the point I was making is that polytechs in particular weren't performing as well as they could have been, and so we've made some changes to improve the quality in that area.
Hi Louise, my name's Arana, I'm from Auckland Uni Student Association. My question is about the Student Services Levies directive that's come out of Minister Joyce's office recently. Basically, can you tell us a bit more about the policy rationale behind excluding clubs and events and student accommodation and lots of the things that the universities and the student associations are really, really concerned about?
Yep, absolutely. So that was a change that was part of the Education Amendment Bill number 4 that was passed earlier this year. And so the policy intent around that is to give students an ability to actually have some input and better transparency around the setting of those support services fees. The fees have been significantly increasing over the past few years, and students really haven't had any ability to impact that. So the directive has come out of the Minister's office. The feedback for that has closed, and I know that I don't know the number of submissions that have come in, but I know that there's been a number of concerns raised in that, like you're talking about in terms of the list of services that can be included in that student support fee. And so the important thing is the Minister's now considering all the submissions that have come in as a result of that before he'll be making decisions about finalising it. So,
may I just ask, do you know when we can sort of expect a finalised?
I don't have a time frame. I'm really aware that there is some urgency around it, given the time frames involved. So he's very, very aware of that, and it was great to see that there was a lot of feedback that was provided on that draft directive. So for those of you in the room who've been involved in that process, thanks very much, and it's really important that you've been able to feed in your comments and concerns.
Yeah, question I'll ask. Now, 100 years ago, a graduate of Auckland University went to Oxford University and tutored this person called J.R.R. Tolkien in a course which enabled him to write a book called The Lord of the Rings, which became, which has helped our movie industry and helped the tourism industry and things like that. Now, I was doing that program a couple of years ago, and it got cut, and that program has been cut in other universities and is in the process of being finally cut down in Dunedin. Now, the question I want to know is, what is your party's policy on protecting courses like that, which have helped, our economy, our tourism, and everything like that, and, has produced people that have helped, advance in the international world?
I'm not sure the specific course that you're talking about that's been cut, but decisions like that are made by the individual institutions that are actually offering them. So government doesn't say, we want you to only offer these 3 courses at that university and these 5 courses at that polytech. So those sorts of decisions around what courses are offered at each institution are the decisions of that institution. So that's not really something that the government or in this case, that the National Party can comment on. That's for you to provide feedback through your individual institutions.
Yeah. So there's no policy. There's no policy in the party to try to cut, government to try and cut those programs or anything like that.
No, the decisions about what courses are offered at polytechs and universities are the domain of those organisations.
Okay.
So I have a question. The VSM legislation leaves it up to institutions largely to decide whether or not they want a mandated representative structure on the campus. An official representative structure. It's up to the institution. Why is that appropriate? And what choice do students have if there is no student association on the campus?
Well, I would disagree with your premise in that students' associations can continue as they are.
If they have the mandate from the institution.
No, well, I disagree with that, because it's just the same as saying Greenpeace can only operate if someone else says they're allowed to. Well, that's rubbish. Groups form all the time and have members and funding and provide services. So it's not for the government or a particular institution to say you are allowed to exist. Definitely not. And because you've had strong relationships with the institutions that you work with, I can't see that there would be any change in that.
I actually follow that up, because I think there's a bit of fundamental misunderstanding about the role of student associations. The representative function of student associations is primarily an internal relationship with an institution. So they represent students on academic board, on the university council, across the institution, on maybe 100 of committees, literally. If the institution doesn't want to recognise a mandated student association, then it cannot fill that function. And there is no choice for students to decide that they want a representative organisation on the campus.
Yeah, but the flip side, if you look at the changes that were made in the Education No. 4 bill, which directly provides student input into fees and what they cover, that is saying that the institutions must listen to the students and the voice and your comments and feedback around the setting of fees and what they cover.
But
So I think
they can choose not to recognise the student association in that model.
They can too.
Yeah.
But what I was saying is that in terms of the student voice, which is one of the issues that you open to your remarks with in terms of being important, that is embedded in that legislation. Is it possible that another group might spring up and that you might therefore in effect have more than one organisation representing students? I guess that's possible. I don't think it's particularly likely, but it is possible. There's all sorts of things that could occur, but I don't think that the concern that you are voicing is likely.
Any questions on the floor? We've got time for a few more.
Sorry, have you got a technical problem you're trying to solve here?
Just get background. Hi Louise, Stefan from Massey, Albany.
Hi.
Happy birthday to your daughter.
Oh, thank you.
I just had a question, sort of shifted away from BSM and that sort of thing. The main focus is degrees for students in New Zealand, progress, intellectual advancement, all that sort of stuff. What does the National Party have in mind in terms of retaining New Zealand graduates in New Zealand? Because you were saying the biggest problem you're having with recouping student loans is overseas students who have most likely gone there because they have a huge student loan at home. What does the National Party aim to do to combat that, keep students here, keep that brain drain that has been going on for a while, keep that down or minimise it as much as possible?
I think there's a couple of things that are important. Part of it is that I don't think necessarily that we want to restrict people from going overseas, to further their studies or to work or to play. Because I think that's, as we would all recognise, it's a pretty important part of who Kiwis are in exploring the world. What we do want to do, though, is provide an environment where our Kiwis who are educated want to come back. And that's really a much bigger picture in terms of You know, do we have a country, do we have an economy, do we have levels of wages that attract our best and brightest back? And are we there at the moment? No. You know, that's why so much of a focus for us as the national government is around getting the economy on a much stronger footing, so that businesses have more confidence to take on staff, and so that people who are working businesses are more profitable and therefore able to pay better wages. Because that's the sort of thing that will attract you, you know, once you've done your study, once you've gone and done whatever you want to overseas, to come back. And you know, that's not an easy one for us to do. And you know, if I look at my brother, he probably spent 5 or 6 years overseas before coming home to New Zealand, working here and raising his family. Could he earn more overseas? Absolutely. But he's also attracted to the quality of life that we have here.
So just to clarify, but the bigger picture is make the economy better and hopefully everything else will follow on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, having a strong economy is fundamental to so many things. You know, if we want to be able to fund more in health and education, in whatever area, we actually need to have an economy that can support that. In terms of individuals having a better quality of life, it's around having higher wages. But that's not something that you can just, you know, wave a magic wand and say, right, well, you know, everybody now can get this amount. It's got to be earned first, and that's why the focus is the economy.
Thank you.
David.
Yeah, hi, my name's Dave. I represent extramural students along with Elf. Many extramural students have to attend contact courses, and it costs a lot of money to get to them. For example, if you've got a person who's working 10 hours a week and say doing 5 papers, then they can't get the student allowance. And they might say, for example, if Timberley's got a flight of Palmerston for a couple of contact courses. If they can't afford to go up to them, it's not a contact course. What support has the government got in place to assist them to go to these courses?
So are they funded currently? Are they funded currently?
We've removed the funding. It's the allowance, the $1,000 allowance that most students, other than part-time students, get.
Yeah.
Course-related.
So my understanding of how the and you know, I might not have the details of all of this right, so I'm happy to look into it in more detail. My understanding of how the part-time equation works is that, you know, there's part-time and there's part-time, and there's a continuum in terms of somewhere along the line that part-time is actually treated as you get your student loan, you can get your allowance and things like that. So just my understanding, and I'm happy for you to say, no, that's not accurate, that there is a continuum. So for example, when I did my MBA, I was working full-time, but the MBA was considered to be a part-time course that was above whatever that line is. So
we're talking about people who don't do it full-time, who work part-time,
yep.
who don't earn, who all the money they earn, they live off, and they have to go to contact courses to pass their paper because they're compulsory. Previously, they had to use a $1,000 court cost because it's what the government provided.
Yep.
They're taking that away next year. What's going to be in this place?
Well, we're not making any further changes to it. So the changes that have been made will remain.
So it can't go.
Okay, I have
Not
one
in that
more
instance.
Okay.
final question. It's more of it seems to be a statement which you might want to comment on as well from the student. There's talk about introducing, I think, education. I think we're talking about education performance indicators, and you think they will be part of that is that they're useful to students. And the comment from the student basically is that high-level figures about qualification and course completion rates and even retention and progression are not useful to students, considering what sort of tertiary institution they want to go to and what program or study they want to, because they're just not, they can't be drilled down enough, and those are not really the questions that students ask when they consider what sort of education they want. So I just wonder whether you want to comment on that, because it seems like those indicators, part of the pretense of it is to help students, when the reality is that I think very few students will use those indicators.
I'm surprised at your comment, you know, for that reason, because I think if you're choosing to invest significantly in your future, then the sorts of decisions you make around where you study and what you study are pretty important. And so those performance indicators are related to 5% of the institution's funding, which is at risk. So there is finally an incentive in place for the institutions to have a higher level of performance than perhaps otherwise. If you say that's something that you don't use, that's not useful to you, fine, I hear that. But I don't know that that's necessarily the view of all students. And given that this is the sort of closing statement, I come back to what we see as important in terms of making sure that our tertiary education system is the best possible, that it's of a high quality, that our young people are then able to leave their study in whichever institution they choose to deliver that with the skills they need to have a better future. And yes, there is a focus on making sure that there is value for money. And I think that's where, as well as being students, many of you are out there working, which means you are taxpayers as well. And therefore there is a motivation for all of us to ensure we have a high-performing tertiary education system. So I've really enjoyed your discussion and your questions and your comments. Can I commend you for organising this summit today?